So welcome back to 2.14. This would be part 2, calculating the slope of a line without graphing. So while determining the slope of a line that goes through the points 6, 5 and 3, 7, Gloria figured out that delta y is equal to -2 and delta x is equal to 3 without graphing. So remember, delta y is our change in y and then delta x is our change in x, right? So explain how Gloria can figure out the horizontal and vertical distances of the slope triangle without graphing, and then draw a sketch of the line and validate her method. So here, if you guys notice, you pretty much have 2 points, right? And then each point represents a part of the line, right? So this is our first point, x1, y1, and then this is be our second point, x2, y2. So here, I want to figure out, so let's start off by making the sketch. So 6, 5 is our first value. So we can go by ones here, and then 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6, 5, and then we're going to go 5 up, again going by ones on the x-axis, on the y-axis. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's our first point, and then 3, 7 would be our second point. So 3, 7 is up here. So now if we connect those two values, you'll see that we have our line. And then it says that Gloria determined that delta y equals -2, right? And then delta x equals, in this case, +3. So to figure that out, pretty much if you notice here, the change in y is this distance here, and then the change in x is this distance here. So delta y equals -2. So how can you get -2 out of these two values here? So if you notice, I can subtract 5 minus 7. So 5 minus 7 gives me -2. So that means I changed by 2. And then pretty much, how did I change in x? So my change in x was 3. And if you notice here, the relationship between these two numbers, again, if I subtract those two, that'll be 6 minus 3 is equal to +3. So that would be pretty much how we can figure out delta y is our change in that, right? So this is delta y, and this would be delta x. And then what is the slope of the line? So remember, the slope of the line is equal to delta y over delta x. The change in y over the change in x, which in this case would be just -2 over +3. Right? So remember, that would be 5 minus 7 divided by 6 minus 3. And then use Gloria's method without graphing to calculate the slope of the line that goes through the points 4, 15. So 4, 15 and 2, 11. So again, we're going to figure out the slope. So it's the change in y over the change in x. And that's equal to, our change in y goes from 15 to 11. So 15 minus 11 divided by 4 minus 2. So we drop down 4, and then we go 2 to the right. And again, if you simplify that, you'll see that we just have 2 over 1. So that will be our simplest slope. Okay, we're going to try it one more time. It says, use Gloria's method to calculate the slope of the line that goes through the points 28, 86 and 34, 83. So again, our change in y over our change in x. So this is equal to, so this would be our y values. So that would be 86 minus 83 divided by our change in x, which is 28 minus 34. So 28 minus 34. So that gives us, on top is going to be +3. 28 minus 34, that would be -6. And again, if you simplify this, you pretty much get -1/2. And it says, another student found the slope from part D to be 2. What error or errors did the student make? So they said that in the previous problem they had delta y over delta x equals to positive 2. So what do you think happened here that would make the student think that the answer is positive 2? So for sure, for this to be positive 2, right, they pretty much put the change in x on top. So the change in x in the numerator, right? And then they put the change in y in the denominator. And now if you notice, my answer is negative 1/2. So what do you think they did wrong to get positive 2 instead of negative 2? So another thing again, if you notice, I put the 86 over 28 is our first point right there. And then our second point is 83 over 34. 83 over 34, that's our second point. So they probably flipped the order in one of these. If they got positive 2, that means they probably flipped the order in the bottom one as well. So that's another thing that they made a mistake on. So change the order of the points. Or in this case, of the variables, right? X and Y. And then question 238. What is the steepest line possible and what is its slope? And be ready to justify your statements. So pretty much if you guys think about it, the steepest slope you can climb on, right? Or it would be the hardest thing to climb would be just, right? If you're climbing up a mountain, right? If we're going up a mountain, and then what would be the hardest part of the mountain to like climb up on? In this case, right, this is pretty simple. I can just keep going here and then I go down. That shouldn't be hard to climb. I go up again and then I go down. And then this right here would be the hardest part for me to climb, right? Because after that, the slope gets different. So in this case, if you guys see that, it's pretty much going to be a vertical line. So a vertical line would be the steepest. And then if you guys think about this as well, right? So what is a change here? So what would be the change in y? We can go from low point to a high point, right? And then over the change in x. And if you notice, if it's a vertical line, we're not changing, we're not going to the left or the right. So the slope here is what we have in undefined. All right, so that's the slope of a vertical line. And again, we discussed it already in previous lessons. The undefined slope. And then lastly, consider the equation for a line y equals mx plus b. What does m represents? And then what does a b represents? And now consider the four representations of a line, of a linear function, situation, right? For example, tile pattern, the table, the equation, and a graph, where in each of these representations, you will look if you wanted to determine the slope and the y-intercept. So here again, if we're looking at pretty much at a situation, right, which was our tile patterns, if we're looking for the slope and the y-intercept, where can I find those two? And in this case, m would be the growth of the tiles, right? Growth of tiles. And then b would be considered our initial value, right? Or starting value. If we're looking at a table, right? So if we're looking at a table now, so m and b, those two parameters, I can find m at a table by pretty much, if you guys look at it right here, like the table that we have, Our growth is our change in pretty much in y, and then the change in x, right? So we can see the change in the points, right? We can determine the change in the points. Or in this case, we can do the same thing that we did right here, where we have two values and then we can just use those two. So we can determine the change by looking at the points or the growth. And if we're looking at the table to find b, it's going to be pretty much what we our x value, where our x is equal to 0, and then our y is equal to b, right? In the situation, that was our figure 0. My bad. Okay, and then an equation, finally, the next one. Equation. So if we're looking at that, then m is going to be mb, right? So m is our coefficient, and b is our constant number. And then again, that's pretty much in your y equals mx plus b, right? So m is a number that multiplies the x, which is a slope, and b is a constant number. And then finally, we're going to talk about a graph. So on a graph. So to find on a graph, if you want to find m or b, right, you pretty much just have to look at where it crosses the y-axis, right? So where it crosses the y-axis. So that's our y-intercept. And then our slope is pretty much our change in y over our change in x. And again, you just have to pick 2 points that are easy to choose at. They just pretty much have to cross the grid.